Today I will be refuting my opponent's claim the legalization of human cloning would lead to social unrest. A social unrest is defined as rioting, uncontrollable violence, rebellions, and mass protests. My opponent's secondary claims were clones have a hard time being individual. 2, the clones process is widely unpracticed and wasteful. 3, clones are known to be born with health complications. And 4, cloning humans would conflict with many of people's beliefs in nature and religion. My opponent's first claim, clones would have a hard time being individual, focuses on expectations that the clones would have to be like their parents and the mass uproar it would cause, and how impossible it is for these clones to be individual. I would like to first address that the problem of expectations is not unique to clone children. China has some of the highest expectations on children. Kids are expected to get straight A's, go to piano practice, and still on the weekends go to additional school in order to keep up with education. Yet, unlike my opponent's claim, these high expectations resulted in China being ranked #1 globally in math, science, and reading. And there was no uproar. Most of us in this classroom have to reach high expectations, a $20,000 expectation of us to get good grades. And we're not out in the streets rioting. Instead, we're using these expectations to influence reality and creating results. Next, my opponent said that it would be difficult for the clone to be individual. But he forgot to address nature versus nurture. McLeod says that simply psychology states, nature is what we think of pre-wiring. It's influence, genetics, inheritance, biological factors. It's basically just your DNA. Nurture is genuinely taken as the influence of external factors after conception. The product of exposure, life experiences, friends, peers, everything else that makes you who you are. So although the clone shares the same genes as the parent, the experience, environment, and peers, and also the way they were raised, will change them dramatically. Identical twins have almost identical DNA, and usually are raised in the same household, same environment, yet they still have many differences in appearances, personalities, and interests. My opponent's second claim was that cloning is widely in practice and wasteful. I would like first to address that this has nothing to do with his claim of legalization of human cloning would lead to social unrest, but I will address it anyways. Human cloning is banned in 45 of 195 countries. That's less than 25, which is less than widely. But Explore states that most of the work that has been done is less about copying ourselves as a whole and more about copying bits of ourselves. This includes skin, tissues, muscles, and even whole limbs, all an exact match of your own DNA. Kristen Gogner from How Science Works stated, as of August 2008, more than 99,000 people in the United States were on the national waiting list for organs. And according to Oregon Prographic and Transplantation Network, on average, only 28,000 received a transplant. First, you have to find a donor. Then you have no guarantee that the body will accept a new organ. By using therapeutic human cloning, you could potentially eliminate the wait time and the risky odds of traditional organ transplants by creating custom cloned organs of your own cells that your body would be able to recognize, therefore saving hundreds of lives, which I don't consider wasteful. He then stated that clones are known to be born with health complications, but of course they are. We've only been working on clones for 20 years. Human papillomavirus virus, HPV, has been around since 1984, and we've barely found a cure this year, which is 35 years later. The first documented case of cancer occurred in 3000 DC, and to this day, we're still on a search for a cure. Science isn't quick. We're trying to make a human person, yet we are surprised that in 20 years, there's still complications. Of course there is. But this itself will not lead to social unrest, and with time, we will be able to perfect cloning and actually be able to experiment on humans. His last claim stated that cloning humans would conflict with many people's beliefs and nature about religion. But we shouldn't let religion stop us from advancing as a society. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Bible prohibits ingesting blood and that Christians should not accept blood transfusions. Yet blood transfusions are very available today because they save millions of lives. And there is no social unrest that is happening from that. Religion can conflict with most things in everyday life. I mean, up to like a year ago, 2 years ago, gay marriage was banned. But why? It's that kind of acts that are stopping us from advancing as society. So therefore, that should not be a reason for us not to be able to clone and be able to advance as a society. So in conclusion, clones would not have a hard time becoming individual, and if so, they would probably have a normal life anyways. Two, the clones being processed isn't widely unpracticed, and it does have a reason. Also, yes, clones have health complications, but we're only 20 years in, and we're only practicing in 45 countries. Lastly, religion shouldn't stand in the way of science, and we should be able to advance as a society. Thank you.
All right, the structural stuff is all good. The first point that you're talking about suggests that the idea of expectations is not particularly unique. I like the comparative example that you give. Although you have no evidence about the expectations in China, you do have suggest that they're number one when it comes to reading and math and those sorts of things. I think you could give us the source citation on that. You do kind of use a hypothetical about the amount of money that people are putting pressure on themselves for going to college. So I assume that that's a pretty reasonable example that people can relate to. On the second point, you go for the nature versus nurture issue, and I think you have a pretty good explanation of that. There's an assertion that identical twins are substantially different in their actions and behaviors. I think you need some information on that. The DNA thing and the circumstances, that makes a lot of sense, but your claim is that they often end up with different kinds of personalities and that sort of thing. I'm going, well, says who? I don't have any information that suggests that. I just have your say-so on that particular point. On the question of whether or not it's the legalization issue, you basically kind of go with this notion that doing research on this could have potential advantages. We might want to distinguish the difference between human cloning for reproductive purposes and cloning for research purposes where only tissue is involved, because it sounds to me like you're making an argument for that and not necessarily human cloning for reproduction. And then the notion that potential problems could come up, you say, well, yeah, research involves problems. The question is, are those problems going to be something that is significant? I think there are value arguments that are being discussed here that could be potential problems for both sides in the argument, and takes us out of our issue of a claim of fact. And the argument about religion, you say it shouldn't be, it should be preventing people from doing particular things. If it's an ethical standard, lots of ethical standards should prevent us from doing particular things. The question is this particular thing a problem? And I think that that's one of the things that you need to kind of go into depth about. But again, that's a value argument. I think those last two arguments are value-based for the most part. All right, thank you.